Great. Welcome, everyone, to today's session to child abuse and neglect reporting. We're looking at some of the nuts and bolts here. My name is Polly Gallagher. I'm with the Colorado State Library with Public Library Leadership Development, and I'm joined with Kate Compton, also from the State Library's Youth Services team. Yolanda Arrendo is our presenter today. She's the co-deputy director of the Division of Child Welfare in the Office of Children, Aging, and sorry, Yolanda, I just missed it, of Children, Aging, and Community Services in the Colorado Department of Human Services. So CSL has been providing a series of webinars and panel discussions relevant to library professionals working with youth in their communities of service. And this series and all CSL libraries offering, including our staff positions and operating expenses, are paid for by grant funding from the Federal Institute of Museum and Library Services, which allows us to provide them to you at no cost. At the end of this session, we ask that you please complete a survey. We utilize these survey responses both to justify our funding to collect quantitative data, as well as for us to listen to our participants about how we can continue to improve and diversify our training offerings. I also can provide our presenter with some feedback from these. We deeply appreciate your time and thought everyone put into these surveys and help us to grow and be better librarians to you. And with that in mind, thank you for your patience as we go through those logistics and overview of today. Yolanda, thank you for being with us, and I'll go ahead and pass to you.
Thank you, Polly. I really appreciate the opportunity to be with you all today to talk about reporting suspected child abuse or neglect, and especially for the unique experiences that I'm sure that you all have in your library settings where you encounter children and youth and may have questions or concerns. So doing my best today to give you a general overview and then happy to answer any questions. As Polly mentioned before, we will have the opportunity for you to have access to this presentation today. It does have some hyperlinks for the resources on our Colorado for Kids or CO for Kids website. There's some great FAQs, some professional resources, and want to make sure you have those hyperlinks available. I always like to set time when you all are setting your time aside to engage in your own learning and be able to become more informed about reporting known or suspected child abuse or neglect. And so I'd like to set the intention for us today with some learning objectives, being to develop more of an awareness of when and where to call, and reviewing child abuse or neglect definitions as they apply here in Colorado, just to give you an idea of what are the kind of situations you may encounter where you might have concerns for child abuse or neglect, and then wanting to know where, if you do have those concerns, you may be able to report them. Also help empower you all as participants in your various communities at the library settings that you work in, to discuss your response to suspected child abuse or neglect. So those are our learning objectives for today. Again, I welcome questions and appreciate the moderator being able to help me navigate questions via the chat. So just for some kind of setting the stage information that I like to share, because we are a little bit unique here in Colorado. As you see the map of the United States there, Colorado's child welfare system is a state supervised and county administered system. So that means there are 64 counties of human or social services throughout the state of Colorado. So every county in Colorado has its own department of human services or social services, where Colorado is only one of 9 states that has that type of child welfare system. So you see, like, we're surrounded in a sea of blue there in the map because most states have a statewide child welfare system, where we have a county-based child welfare system. So that means there's more local control over how child abuse and neglect concerns are responded to within those local communities. And just as I'm sure that you all feel, really integrated into the communities that the libraries that you work in are located in, so do those county departments of human or social services feel well integrated to the communities in the counties where they are located. All right, so really like to just start off with, when should I call the hotline? If I have a concern or worry about a child or youth, really, when should I call the hotline? So I'd like to just present this information kind of in 2 parts. One is that if harm has occurred, so a child or youth has been subjected to abuse or neglect, right? Then whether or not you're a mandatory reporter, most likely in a situation you're, professional working in those library settings, and you are a concerned citizen, a concerned community member in that role, right? Because you're engaging so often with children and youth in those settings. So if you believe a child or youth has been subjected to abuse or neglect, that's when it is important to call because you might have that firsthand information or observation and witness to those concerns. Also, if you believe danger exists, right? So a child or a youth has been subjected to a circumstance or condition that would reasonably result in abuse or neglect. And so we really think about calling the hotline and letting the child welfare system know about a child or a youth that you're concerned about because harm has occurred or because you believe danger exists. And that's really how we want to look at the approach to potentially contacting an agency regarding your concerns for a child's welfare or a youth's welfare. When should a person, an individual, consider alternatives to calling the child abuse reporting hotline? That's because no harm has occurred or no danger exists for that child or youth. Maybe the family is experiencing a lack of resources. That often happens as families will, struggle with different issues, or no abuse or neglect is occurring. However, you as an individual or me as an individual, I don't necessarily agree with the parenting choices, right? So thinking about other resources in a community that might be more appropriate to refer a family to or to just know are out there as voluntary services to support families who are experiencing poverty and it's not abuse or neglect, or maybe have just a difference in how they approach parenting that really isn't harming the child or isn't creating danger for the child. So that's really where it can be helpful to just kind of think about, what am I really worried about? Like, what has the child or youth told me? Or what have I observed directly or learned about that makes me truly worried for the health, safety, or well-being of that child? And is it more of a parenting difference or a resource issue, or is it more because I'm concerned that there's been harm or there's danger? Again, we'll make sure that you have access to this PowerPoint because it does have these hyperlinks here, not only on the right side where it says like Code for Kids Child Abuse Prevention Toolkit or resource toolkits, that those are hyperlinks to our Code for Kids awareness website. There's also some additional information here that are just general Colorado-based resources that might benefit families, or at least benefit you in knowing that they're out there in case you ever have the chance to refer a family. 211 Colorado in particular is a statewide resource line that can help connect families or individuals to resources that might better provide them with support that when it's not an abuse or neglect situation. Okay, so where do I call? Meaning, if you do have a concern about child abuse or neglect for something that that something has been told to you or you've observed something more likely directly, where can you call to report those concerns? There are three main agencies, and you can contact any one of the three to report any concerns you have about child abuse or neglect. Local law enforcement, you may have areas like nearby your library setting where there's a local law enforcement agency there, maybe like a satellite office for law enforcement, or you can contact the state hotline. That is a 24-hour, 7-day a week, 365-day a year phone number, which is the 844-CO for kids. And you can also contact the county department where the family resides. So that could be the county where you're located. Again, there are 64 counties of human services across Colorado, and each one has a public facing hotline number. If you're not sure, like I'm not sure, exactly where the family might live, or I'm not sure what the phone number for that County Department of Human Services is, it's okay to contact the state hotline or to contact local law enforcement. Local law enforcement tends to be the agency where a lot of folks will contact them if it's a really like an emergency situation, an urgent situation where that child or youth needs attention immediately because maybe harm has occurred to them or they're in a dangerous situation. Also, often probably in your settings, law enforcement may also be an agency that you contact because you don't know the family. You don't know where they live or where they're going to return after they leave the library. And so in order to make more immediate contact with that family regarding a concern, or that child or youth regarding a concern that you have, local law enforcement can respond within minutes. Where child welfare, even though there are situations where we may be able to respond immediately for child welfare means within the same day. It may not be able to be within minutes. So depending on the sense of urgency that you have regarding the issue that you're learning about or observing, I recommend that you contact local law enforcement. Or if you do know the family or know more about the situation and maybe know where the family is located, then the state hotline is also a great resource to contact. Also know that regardless of where you call, if you call the state hotline or you call local law enforcement, we really, and or the County Department of Human Services, we really try to work collaboratively between all of those agencies to make sure that if law enforcement is contacted first, hopefully they're referring that situation or that concern over to the county's Department of Human Services and vice versa, so that in case there's any criminal concern for what has occurred, that can be handled by law enforcement. And if there's any family support or resources needed by the family, that can be handled rather, sorry, by the Department of Human Services. Okay, let me pause there to just actually go back to see if there's any questions about where you would call before we speak more specifically about what are the kind of situations that you may encounter about when you should call.
And I'm going to say feel free to drop those in the chat, or if you prefer to raise your hand or come off mute and share, you're welcome to. But at this time, I'm not seeing anything in the chat just yet.
Okay, great, thank you. So when we think about child abuse or neglect, child abuse, and we'll talk here about physical abuse here in just a moment, or what is suspicious for physical abuse, that tends to maybe be the first thing that comes to people's mind because there's physical harm that's occurred to a child. Neglect is the most common situation that we see because there are a lot of categories that can fall under the umbrella of child neglect. And so when we're looking at the law in Colorado, and not that I expect you all to be experts on the law, it's just to give you a little bit of context to really think about where are the areas where harm may have occurred or you believe danger exists that really are worth reporting to either local law enforcement or to the county department or the state hotline regarding child abuse and neglect. So when a child's parent or caregiver essentially fails to provide adequate food, clothing, shelter, medical care, which can include mental health care or supervision, that constitutes neglect by law in Colorado. So it's really failing to provide adequately for that child's basic needs, that child or youth. And when I say child, just know that I'm using that somewhat interchangeably at times with the term youth. In Colorado, by law, a child is recognized from birth up until age 18. So when you think about the influence or the jurisdiction that child welfare has regarding families and suspected or known child abuse or neglect, it's from children who are born up until their age 18. That's considered a child or a youth. So whether or not a family is providing, or in this case, a parent or a caregiver is providing adequate food, clothing, shelter, medical care, or supervision, that's really, again, what constitutes concerns for neglect. And really looking at that term adequate. So it's not, what do I, Yolanda, think is in the best interest of this child? Do I think a child, should have their own home and their own bedroom and their own yard to play in and all the toys that they could ever want? Yeah, of course, I would ideally love situations like that for children. That's not the same as, does that child have adequate food or does that child have adequate shelter? Because, shelter can be they're staying with a family friend or they're staying in a transitional housing program. Or in some of the warmer months in Colorado, you could be staying, camping or in a van that's equipped, to be able to stay there and live there. And so really thinking about what are those basic needs. And I know in this, or I imagine rather, sorry, not that I know, I imagine in the situations you might find yourself in, you may not feel like you know enough to know if the child has adequate food or clothing or shelter or supervision in their home. Supervision might, though, be a question that comes up about whether or not children or youth, maybe especially in the evenings or on weekends or during summer breaks or breaks from school, whether there's adequate supervision for those children being in those library settings. So when it comes to supervision, for example, there's no particular age in law in Colorado in which a child can be left unsupervised because it really depends. It depends on where they're being left unsupervised, in a library setting, at home, in a park, where exactly are they being left unsupervised? What is the circumstance about why they're being left unsupervised? And, you may be uncertain about that circumstance. For what length of time, for what time of day, do they have access to safe adults or a way to contact the police if there was an emergency, like a medical emergency? So it really is dependent, and you may not know enough details to know whether there truly is a concern for neglect around supervision. However, you may have a concern or a worry or a question that comes up, right? And so in supervision, like what I like to think about, well, actually in any of these categories of potential neglect, what I like to think about is what is the concern that I have related to danger. So if no harm has occurred, right, the child is left unsupervised at a library for an extended period of time, there may have been no harm that has occurred to that child or youth because they're in a, public space, they're in a safe place. However, I may be concerned about, a lack of supervision around danger, meaning like, well, if they're left here, do they have anything to eat? Who's going to come and get them? What if something happens to them? How are they going to get to and from the library, for example? So when I think about supervision, I'm really thinking about what is that impact to the child or the youth, and essentially then meaning that danger that exists because they are unsupervised or they lack adequate supervision. So those are kind of the questions that, should come to mind. What am I concerned about if the child doesn't have adequate food? What's the danger that exists if I believe they don't have adequate food? Or what's the danger that exists if I believe they don't have adequate clothing? Maybe that looks different in the summer months than it does in the winter months, right? If they have adequate clothing. What about, again, going back to supervision, what am I concerned? What am I concerned with is the risk or the danger that could occur to that child if they continue to be left unsupervised. What else kind of comes to mind for you all when you think about these categories of neglect that you might encounter situations where you become concerned for a child's health or safety or well-being regarding neglect?
I think a lot of it comes down to that differentiation between and with that danger and different thoughts there, as well as considering library privacy and a person's use of the library kind of thing. I also see on here online predators is something that people are thinking. Thanks,
Yeah,
Christine.
oh, I'm sorry, was there another
Oh no,
question?
that one.
Oh,
Yeah.
yeah, there's definitely, that with the lack of supervision or what might be a concern for inadequate supervision, again, that risk and that danger, it may not necessarily be like physical injury that we're worried about could occur. And that could occur too, right? There could be a risk of physical injury because there's an inadequate supervision. A lot of times it might be situations like a child or youth may be unsupervised or there's a lack of adequate supervision, and that puts them at risk for other types of situation, like you mentioned. Maybe engaging in high risk activities or engaging in activities that potentially create more risk, like an online predator. Exactly, that's a good example of being concerned. And often when it comes to these type of situations with neglect, depending on, I'm not sure how often you all have the opportunity to interact with these children or youth or with their caregivers or parents. You may or may not have the opportunity to interact. A lot of times it isn't just, oh, I observe this situation and therefore I believe it's neglect, I need to report it. Often it might also be, what's the response if the issue is raised to the attention of that individual. And so by that, what I mean is, if I saw a child or a youth unsupervised in a setting, and it would be, a normal experience for me to engage with that child or youth, I might have the opportunity to come to learn more about, like, oh, you come here every day for 6 hours a day and with no caregiver, versus, oh, it's one afternoon after school because I have a book report due, or it's every day in the summer because there's no other alternatives for childcare. And this really is a more like being used, in a different way than maybe it's intended, that space within a library. So like, what is kind of the context or potentially the circumstances under which the situation is occurring? And often, if we do have an opportunity to engage with that youth or with the youth's caregivers, to be able to, not that you or any one of us is doing an investigation, that's not the role of anyone in your position. It's more like, would there be a normal opportunity to learn more about the situation or to be able to express, with curiosity, what's really impacting the situation? Because that sometimes will tell us, meaning as an individual might tell me, do I have more to be concerned about here? Or did what I learned from observing the situation or from interacting with that young person, did what I did what occur make me more worried or less worried? I have a really important book report, so I'm going to be here every night, this week, and then maybe not for a long time after that, or I am going to be here like every day because my mom or dad doesn't have childcare for me in the summer and I'm only 9 years old. And then I'm unsupervised at the library for, 8 hours a day, every day in the summer, right? Like, what about the situation and my worry creates danger? What about the situation might be negatively impactful to that child or youth if it remains the same or gets worse? And has there been an opportunity for there to be a different outcome? Meaning, like, again, not that I'm expecting you all to engage specifically with that youth or with that family. If you do have that opportunity and you do learn more from it, that could alleviate some of your concerns or it could exacerbate some of those concerns, right? So a lot of times with neglect, it's being able to understand a little bit more about the conditions that the child or the youth or the circumstances that the child or the youth are in. What else kind of comes to mind in the scenarios that you may encounter in your settings there with libraries, that you might consider neglect or have wondered if there's a concern there for neglect?
One of the comments in the chat, kids that are here all day, they use computers all day. We need to watch who we put them next to. And also kids or teens that feel comfortable enough to open up to library staff about a neglect or abuse. All we can do is listen when there is an existing case open already.
Yes, and especially I think one of the things that is important is that you may or may not gain information about whether like a case is open or not already, like you mentioned. And sometimes you might come to learn that, right? If you continue to be concerned though about a child or a youth situation or circumstance, even if you are told that a child welfare case, for example, or a child protection case is open, you can still raise those concerns up because it may be new information. It may be the result of a situation that we thought was resolved around danger and has come back again. So it could be a brand new dangerous situation, or it could be the reoccurrence of a dangerous situation. And often, again, you all have the unique opportunity to observe and interact with children and youth in a setting where they may start to feel comfortable disclosing more information to you all. And so never hesitate to raise those concerns up if you have them and you're not sure if there's a child protection case, because again, it could be a new or renewed threat that exists as a result of a child feeling more comfortable. They're likely to disclose more than maybe they have in the past, or maybe a situation was addressed and then it's coming back up again as a concern. Okay, we can definitely continue the dialogue, as I imagine neglect is often something you are concerned about. Let's also, though, talk about physical injury, because I imagine there might be circumstances where you're concerned about non-accidental physical injury to a child. So the way that the law reads in Colorado regarding non-accidental physical injury is that it's any case in which a child exhibits evidence of skin bruising, bleeding, malnutrition, or failure to thrive, injuries like burns or bone fractures, subdural hematomas. A lot of the later part of that language is really going to be a medical determination about whether or not a child is suffering from a non-accidental injury. The first part, though, about any case in which a child exhibits evidence of skin bruising or bleeding really is where non-accidental physical abuse concerns really come in, and what separates physical discipline that the law allows for parents to do or caregivers to do with potential suspicion for physical injury or physical abuse, right? And so that idea of really, when we're talking about evidence of skin bruising, we're talking about marks being left on a child as a result of hitting a child and or using an object to hit a child. So in that case, you may not see the marks, and you don't have to see the marks for the child or the youth to give you credible information, right? They may, like you said, they may feel comfortable enough to disclose to you that they've been recently hit by their parent and, had marks as a result. And if you were to be given credible information related to that type of disclosure, that would be something you would want to report. You don't have to see the marks in order to make that report. You just have to have essentially the law in Colorado is a good faith law. If I report because I'm concerned about the health, safety, or welfare of a child because I believe they have marks on them, because they told me they did, or because I thought I saw marks that looked suspicious. They looked like they could have been non-accidental injuries to a child. If I am reporting that in good faith, meaning I really am concerned about the safety or well-being or health of that child, even if it comes to be that the marks that it's unfounded, essentially, that those marks are not a result of physical abuse, I am protected by law because I made a good faith report as a concerned constituent or citizen of the state, right? And when I say citizen, I'm not talking the like legal documentation type of citizen. I mean a resident of the state of Colorado, that I'm concerned about that situation. I make a good faith report. I'm protected by law from even if that report turns out to be untrue or unfounded. So the evidence of skin bruising, again, those marks left on a child or a youth, you would not have to see them. They would not even have to be current if you were concerned about hearing last week, I went and saw my mom for the weekend and I was hit and I had marks on my legs from that, from an extension cord, right? If that were being disclosed to you, that would be a credible, could be credible information enough for you to report those concerns. When thinking about like bleeding, a lot of times what we see, especially with youth, is that maybe they were slapped in the face by a parent or a caregiver, and that caused their nose to bleed or their mouth to bleed. And even if you don't see the bleeding, or even if there's not bruising left, if you were to be given credible information that a child or a youth bled as a result of being physically hit by their caregiver, that very likely would be a concern for suspected non-accidental physical injury to the child or the youth. Now, this situation with physical injury, non-accidental, it may not be something that you have enough information to know whether or not you should report. And really, it's only when you suspect that it's related to physical abuse that you would want to make that report. And again, that's a tricky situation because if you had a situation, I imagine you might encounter where you either observe or maybe you overhear a child being physically hit by the parent in your library setting, you may not know if there are marks, right? Because it just happened or happened very recently. You may not know if there are marks. If you were concerned, though, about the safety, the physical safety of that child because of what you heard or what you observed, again, Colorado has that good faith reporting law, or that reporting policy that if you're reporting in good faith, I'm concerned that a child might have been harmed because they were physically hit by their parent or caregiver, or physically grabbed or pinched or slapped, then if they ended up not having marks as a result of that physical injury, you would still be protected by having made a good faith report. And it's so tricky because, again, you may not know enough about the situation or the family or the circumstance to report, or you may report what you know, and that may not be enough for the police or for child protection services to intervene with the family. And that can, I imagine, be disheartening or difficult, right? That you're making a report and nothing, feels like nothing, or you believe nothing happens as a result of that report. Are there other questions that come up related to physical injury in the settings that you interact with children and youth?
I am just noting one from Marianne saying, best advice I ever got from a hotline worker, a good faith report is a request for services.
And I'll share here in just a little bit too. We do have the opportunity within the county departments of human services, when reports are made, even if it's not assigned to a caseworker to investigate like physical abuse, the family can still be offered voluntary prevention services. So it doesn't mean that it's not still a concerning situation, and especially with parents and use of physical discipline, while the law allows for parents to use physical discipline unless they leave evidence of skin bruising, like a mark. We also want to support parents, right, with being able to have more tools in their tool belt. Sorry, I'm saying that wrong. More tools in their tool belt is kind of how we say it, meaning that, most often when parents are physically disciplining a child, they are not trying to actually hurt or harm the child. However, they may be frustrated with a behavior. They may be trying to teach a lesson or give a consequence or give, accountability, or hold that child or the youth accountable to a situation. And so we want parents to understand that while the use of physical discipline is not prohibited in law in Colorado, it can increase the likelihood of leaving a mark or leaving evidence of that skin bruising. And are there other techniques or tools and supports that a parent might be able to put in place where they're still able to accomplish their goal of reinforcing a boundary or teaching a lesson, giving an accountability consequence to that child or the youth without potentially harming that child, or being suspected of physical abuse. And so, again, oftentimes it's the opportunity for education for a county department of human services and their child welfare folks to intervene with a family to provide education, support, resources, and information. Was there another question that came up in the chat?
What about signs like flinching, lack of interaction, hyperattention of parents' hands? Are those reportable?
So it's, I'm not going to say they're not reportable. Definitely, if you have a concern that what you're observing is indicative of a concern maybe for safety, then of course you can definitely report that. It may mean the caseworker is not able to intervene with the family because there's not that higher threshold of evidence of skin bruising. And again, part of it is like the context of the situation. If I'm watching a situation, and maybe we've all, I've seen this at a grocery store before or seen this at a park before, there can be a difference between, like, I flinched because you surprised me and I caught the movement in the peripheral. And so my reaction was, oh gosh, like I flinch out of surprise rather than I flinch out of fear. Right. And we may not always be able to distinguish between the two. I think though sometimes when you see children and you watch them interact with their caregiver, there have been times when I've seen at a grocery store, for example, I've seen the adult caregiver and the child is in like the front part of the cart seated, where a parent reached up for some cereal on a higher shelf and the child absolutely like flinched. And my gut reaction was like, that looked like a fear flinch, right? Like that looked like that child is used to that parent raising a hand over them and potentially being hit or struck by them. Now, in that situation, do I have enough to report suspected physical abuse or child abuse? I did not in that moment, because even though I didn't, I had a gut reaction to what I was seeing, and I didn't necessarily like what I was seeing. I didn't know enough about that situation to report known or suspected physical abuse, if that makes sense. I think though, if you see a pattern over time, if you see behaviors over time, so I guess what I'm saying is in isolation, one flinching movement may not be enough for you to report. However, if you're seeing patterns over time, and this is generally the experience of that parent and that caregiver, or sorry, that parent or caregiver and that child or youth, you see like multiple episodes where the child appears fearful of that caregiver, where they may flinch from that caregiver, where they cower from that caregiver. Now you get more of sort of a picture painted for you that there might be a concern for that child's welfare or safety. To me, in those situations, even if I don't see the parent hit the child, or sorry, the parent or caregiver hit the child, I may be like, wow, this is like the third or fourth time I've watched this child cower or flinch or appear fearful, or the parent physically act aggressively to the child, the way they grab them or pull them or move them with force. That together, that's making me concerned for the safety of the child. And even if I don't see a mark, I'm concerned that there might be a suspicion of physical harm or injury to that child. Right. So again, it's very nuanced. And I wish that it was easy to just say, yes, do this. No, don't do that. Every situation depends. It depends on what you're observing, if there's a pattern behind that, if there's an escalation in the incident, like you saw them earlier in the day, maybe the parent and the child, and you saw the child flinch, and then later you saw the parent grab the child and like shake them or grab the child and pull their arm really hard. Again, you're seeing maybe a situation escalate or an incident increase in the concern for the danger that the child is in. So I'm not going to say don't report when you have concerns. What I'm going to say is you want to be able to describe what about the observation is making you concerned for a dangerous situation for the child, or for that health, safety, or welfare of that child. Other thoughts around suspicion for non-accidental physical injury?
Somebody else brought this up, so I just wanted to say it out loud. in the library, especially, we're very concerned with privacy. And when our privacy clashes with this policy, as far as like we need to report abuse, but we're also wanting to protect uh, all of the privacy of our users.
Yeah, absolutely. I can understand, that that can create sort of a tension between making sure you are protecting the confidentiality and private and privacy of those individuals that are utilizing the library and the library space, and then also balancing that with, the concern of a child or a youth. So again, that's why we kind of start and ground that in that danger or harm. I believe harm has occurred, so I need to report something, or I believe danger exists, so I need to report something. So really trying, and again, it's not a perfect science. It's not going to be something that's always easy to differentiate. It really though has to come down to, do I believe this child is in danger, or do I believe this child has been harmed? In order to make that report. Not just, I don't like, because there have been situations I've encountered many times where I've heard caregivers raise their voice to children or curse at a child. And, for me and for me as an individual, just as Yolanda, the way I was raised, the way I was brought up, the values that I have, the beliefs that I have, those are hard situations for me to observe. I don't like to see children, especially young children, being like cursed at or spoken to in really like harsh terms, just because I didn't experience that as I was growing up. And so when I hear that, I'm like, oh, I don't like that. Is that the same thing though, as I believe this child is in danger because of what I heard or because of what I observed? And that's the question I always have to come back to asking myself. I didn't like how that caregiver spoke to that child. Is that the same thing as me saying, I believe that child is in danger? Sometimes the answer is yes. I believe that child's in danger. Many times, though, that answer is like, no, I didn't like that interaction. It really didn't, I didn't really come away with the belief that child was truly in danger, though. And so that's where we really, kind of have that self-reflection of, is this a moment of like my own values conflicting with what I'm observing, or is this a moment of me observing a situation that I really believe that child has been harmed or that child is in danger? Is there another question? Sorry, once in a while I'll see the chat kind of flash, so I'm just making sure I'm not missing anything.
Somebody just dropped in. How can you approach or handle a situation where you see a parent overwhelmed with their child, such as
Mm,
maybe start yelling, forcing them to sit, cussing, etc.?
yeah. That's a wonderful question because, if any of you are parents or have ever been a caregiver to a child or a youth, there are gonna absolutely be moments of frustration or just, trying to like make something happen that's just creating challenges. And I do like to try to support parents in those moments or caregivers in those moments if I can do that in a really, as much as I can, a non-judgmental and hopefully helpful way. And what I mean by that, let me just give a couple of examples, right? Sometimes it is a matter of just calling attention to the situation, not overtly, more just, oh, it looks like you have your hands full. Could I help you with it for a moment? And I'm just going to give two examples that I actually personally recently encountered where I'm hoping it was helpful. And it also kind of broke the moment of where I saw that parent escalating in their frustration. I was on the train to DIA, in DIA, right? Denver International Airport, going on the train to my concourse. And this maybe 4 or 5 year old was tantruming hard on the floor. The train is full, just crying and screaming, and the parents were wanting to like control that. I mean, just because they didn't want to see their child going through that. And also, we're in a very busy airport in a very busy train. And again, everything the mom and the dad were trying was like not really working. And I just saw this, not toward aggression, just exacerbated experience, on their face. I was like reading the facial expression, like, oh my gosh, I don't know what else to do here. He's crying, he won't get up. And so if you've ever been on the train at Denver International Airport, on the walls of the train, of like on the concrete walls where the train passes, there are these like little propellers that the train makes go. And so I saw those and I'm like, oh my gosh, look at those propellers. Those are so cool. Look at that move, and I just mentioned that and I said it in a little bit louder voice than I might normally if I was just talking to my dad who was on the train with me. And I was, kind of saying that, projecting it toward him. And it just gave that child a moment. Wow, those are cool. It would be really cool. Maybe you want to stand up and see those propellers. They move so fast. And it made that child at least pause to consider what I was saying. It gave the parents like a moment of that child being distracted from the child just escalating in their temper tantrum, and the and they're crying and all of that, and it just gave a little bit of a moment of reprieve. It didn't solve the problem. I wasn't trying to solve the problem for them. I was just trying to like say, I see you, I see the struggle, and it's okay to be struggling, and let me just give a moment of distraction if I can. And by then we had stopped at the concourse, the doors had opened, they were able to like continue on their journey. So that's just one example. And I didn't even like think about what to do in that moment other than saying like, okay, I want to help these parents without calling the attention to them. I didn't want to shame or blame them in the moment. That wouldn't have been supportive. It was like, I've had enough experience with toddlers and young children to be able to say, they don't like to miss out. They don't like to miss out on things. So if I tell this child like, oh my gosh, you're missing watching these really cool propellers on the wall spin fast as the train goes by fast, it was like just a moment. That was one example, right? Or another situation, I was in the lobby of a location, and there was a young woman, a young mother with her baby, and the mom was on the phone, and then when she hung up from the phone, her child was a little fussy, not too much, and she just started crying, like for whatever the conversation was on the phone. I didn't really know what that was. There was an emotional reaction from this mother because of whatever phone call she had. And so the child started to cry and respond to like the mother's, concern and emotional state. And so I just grabbed a tissue out of my purse. I didn't want to draw too much attention. I just went over to the chair next to the mother. I just handed her the tissue and said, if you want to talk, I'm here. If you need me to, have a moment to watch your baby, I'm happy to do that while I'm sitting right here. Introduce myself, of course. And so it wasn't just some random strangers coming over here. I let them know I'm a social worker, all of this. And the mom's like, yeah, I just had a really bad fight with my best friend. And, I'm just so upset right now. And it's like, that's okay. Let's just take some breaths. And so I could really sit in a moment of immediate privacy with her and just say, I'm here and I see you. And if you need any help or support, I'm here to help with that. And I'm not saying that you all will find yourself in that situation. However, I think just saying, is there anything I can help with? Right? Or is there anything you need me to help with? Or, handing a tissue, any of those small moments of just personal interaction and personal connection to almost like break what's happening in the moment. Right? Like, because I thought if I didn't say something to that mom or even just go over and say, here's a tissue, I'll be over here if you need to talk. It was just a moment of saying like, it's okay to not be okay. Folks say that it's okay to not be okay. Here's a tissue. It doesn't have to be a big deal. And it just broke the moment so that she wasn't escalating in her emotional state, which was escalating the baby's emotional state, or with the child on the train, his escalating tantrum was causing the parents to feel more and more pressure to try to control him in that situation. And their frustration was raising, like, just to be like, I see you. Can I help you? Or let me try to distract, this child in this moment. Those moments of human connection, it doesn't have to be because you're a librarian or I'm a social worker or, it can just be, I see you as a human. And if there's anything I can do to help support you in this moment, I'm happy to help. I think that's one of the most like valuable things that you can do in that moment if you have the chance to do that.
I think Andrea from Aurora has her hand up. Andrea, if you want to unmute, if you haven't already shared your question.
Yeah, so I wanted to go back to the privacy law, just because as librarians, we're not allowed to identify if someone is in the library, even if a police officer comes asking if a youth is here at the library now. Without a court order, we can't give them that information. So I'm just not quite sure if we're really allowed to report on neglect or abuse within the library when we're not legally allowed to identify people within the library. So I was wondering if you might have some insight on that.
Yolanda, can I just share a couple
Yes,
things on that
I was
one?
going to ask you to share. Yes, please do.
So there's a few things here, but library users of all ages have a right to privacy, and this includes the right to read, borrow library materials free from scrutiny, regardless of age, and also the right to seek information and have a subject of academic and personal research to remain private. And library staff frequently express concerns about where the line exists between privacy and safety. And I think that's something that we really encourage library staff to have that discussion individually about this issue. Back in 2021, with the Child Sexual Abuse Accountability Act, that took away what did it do? It stated that state and local governments can be held accountable if people are if the government agency is aware that abuse is taking place, sexual abuse. So that piece is in play as well. So yeah, I was going to say, if you could take a look at when somebody makes a call, what happens, I think that will help staff to then be able to have these conversations in their individual libraries. Because these laws exist, they haven't been tested, kind of thing, to say, oh, is this, or this? So it really is on the libraries to make a decision on this, the individual libraries.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. And I really appreciate the question as well, because again, there might be that tension between like protecting the confidentiality and the rights of children and youth and families that are utilizing the library as a resource, and then when safety is a concern, right? And so again, that's why we start at the very beginning with talking about, reporting for suspected or known child abuse or neglect really is because you believe harm has occurred or because danger exists. So we are talking about safety. We're not talking about because I don't agree with how this parent is parenting, or I don't agree with, the situation or the way that a child or a family is interacting. It is really grounded in that safety concern. Harm has occurred, so there's a safety issue for that child, or danger exists, so that child may, the risk to that child is harm if that situation continues or worsens. I wanted to, because I know that, we're about 10 minutes out, and I want to make sure other questions could also be brought up. Let me just point this to you all too, because I think it could be helpful to understand what happens with the information when it is shared with the county department or the state hotline. Also with law enforcement as well too, like when there truly is a safety issue that you're concerned about, and that public or that individual's concern for their safety really outweighs the confidentiality component, because that, for a lot of, I know that you're all not considered specifically mandatory reporters unless you have a particular type of license or other category, which may make you fall into the category of mandatory reporters. A lot of times what waives confidentiality in those situations, for at least for mandatory reporters, is the threat of homicide, the threat of suicide, or child abuse, right? And those are specific about safety, meaning that individual may hurt others, they may hurt themselves, or they have been hurt themselves. And so that idea of even for mandatory reporters of child abuse and neglect, the confidentiality is only waived when there is that threat, when danger has occurred, when harm has occurred or danger exists, because it is truly a safety threat at that point. Were there other comments or questions that came in the chat?
There's a couple. One that did pop up was, are we mandatory reporters? And so public library staff are not. But I think there's some institutional, some youth services, as well as school library, where there's variation in that.
Yes. And I can give more detail, like if it's helpful. There is a list of mandatory reporters. So school personnel who work in a school are mandatory reporters, right? So if you are a librarian employed by a school, you would be a mandatory reporter because of the affiliation to the school, right? The school part is what makes a mandatory reporter. In a public library, yep, as you said, you wouldn't necessarily automatically be a mandatory reporter unless you have a different requirements of mandatory reporting. So like I'm a social worker. So if I was a social worker and then also a librarian, because I'm also a social worker, that would make me a mandatory reporter. Not the fact that I'm a librarian in a public library would be the social work part. or if you've ever been like if you're a licensed therapist, or you know, have certain types of licensures or certain types of employment, could make you a mandatory reporter. I would say, though, again, with that, kind of along the same lines of sort of the good faith in reporting, the idea of like, yes, because there's a threat of harm, or there has been harm, or there's a threat of danger to the child or the youth's safety, that again, that's part of like that good faith, is that you are breaching that confidentiality because there truly is a concern for the safety of that child. Not a difference of opinion, not a personal value, not a personal belief. It is about the safety of that child.
One of the
I wanted,
questions.
oh, I'm sorry, go ahead. Yes, please.
Oh, well, I was just going to say, one of the questions that was in here, what do you say when a parent or guardian leaves their young child at a table by themselves, knowing we have a policy in place of unattended children? Do you have any recommendations on wording?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. You know, that might be something you want to like discuss with your colleagues about what has been the most effective approach that they've taken, right? Because often it's like um, a little bit feeling the vibe, so to speak, of the situation. Is this somebody you've interacted with before? Is this the first time? What's the situation? Does it look like they, you know, left them at a table for 2 minutes because they went over to a different section of the library to pull a book and come back? Or is it like 20 minutes that they're leaving a really young child left alone? So, and not that your policy is, oh, 2 minutes is okay, 20 minutes is not okay. I'm not saying that. I think some of it is contextual, though, to like the situation. And, you know, just being able, I think people appreciate authenticity, and I think people appreciate transparency. So that, you know, the approach I would take is being able to say, oh, hi, I just noticed, you know, that your child was at the table unattended for, you know, the last 5 minutes. I just wanted to remind you of our policy. If there's something I can do to help clarify the information, or, you know, support you, you know, with making sure your child's not left unattended, please let me know, right? Well, maybe the last part, not so much, because I don't want them to think you're trying to babysit the child. Like, no, not put you in that situation. So let me walk that piece back. Just coming with, you know, a genuine, friendly, personable approach as a let me just remind you, in case you didn't know, right? In case you didn't know, I just would like to share with you. I think that approach people will appreciate. And then depending, you know, again, if this is like the second or third time you've had to do that, maybe your colleagues would have a different opinion about like how do you approach something when it's like the third time you've had to remind them of the same policy versus like the first time that you're interacting with folks. And not that that doesn't change the friendly, genuine approach that you take. It just may mean that you're being more assertive in the way in which you're approaching the situation. If it's like the third time you're having to remind someone versus the first time you're just letting them know because maybe they didn't realize that that was the policy, or they just needed that reminder. And I can't imagine it would you know, come better from me than it would from your peers and your colleagues here about what's the best way to approach that type of interaction with a parent who's leaving a child unattended.
Yolanda, thank you so much. Those watching, please feel free to enter your questions into the chat or unmute if you prefer to ask your question out loud. I really appreciate the tools that you're providing us, and I think most of our questions that we had dropped into Q&A have had some point of reflection on them. One of them, can you speak to concerns that a youth, particularly older youth, will face potential retribution or further harm from their caregiver if CPS is called or a report is given, or when a teen says don't report?
Sure. Sorry, I'm kind of going around because I'm trying to figure out which is that slide to try to frame that question. So this might be helpful in answering the question that was just posed. So thank you for that question. This is what we call the framework that the county departments of human services, those child protection agencies, utilize when information is provided to them or a report is called in regarding concerns for the child. They utilize this framework to map out the information. And so it might just be helpful to see some of the way in which we map out information. So, you know, what's the reason for the report or the referral? What danger exists or what harm has occurred? What complicates the situation? What are strengths or protective factors within the family? And you may or may not know, you know, that information. This is just what child welfare caseworkers and supervisors do with the information that's provided. And a lot of it may be gray. We may not know the answers to questions. So the reason I brought this framework out, so you can see the various ways that we're gathering information and we're discussing information to know what type of intervention is best for the family. It could be, again, voluntary services offered and resources. It could be a full intervention where an investigation is done because there is suspicion for child abuse or neglect. A complicating factor in answering that question could be that there's concern that the situation might worsen because a report was made, or that the youth might face retaliation or retribution because information was shared. If you are making reports and that's a concern that you have, it's important to share that concern with us, because we would look at that through the lens of a complicating factor, right? Do we need to be worried about a situation worsening because a youth shared information with a librarian when they were in the library space? And those are often, school professionals, medical professionals, other folks that interact quite frequently with children and youth. That's often a concern they have, is that if they told me and I tell a police officer or a county department of human services, it's going to make it worse for the child. And there's no way to promise that it won't. And it's also important for child welfare to know, because we want to know if we believe that the situation is going to worsen or that danger is going to increase. And again, it doesn't have to come out to be true. It's like the concern that you're just filling us in on. I'm concerned about retribution to this youth because they told me what was happening to them in their home, right? And to share that. And so that way, when we do intervene with a family, whether it be for prevention services or for a full child protection investigation, we're aware of that concern and can be on the lookout for that issue having escalated, and also address it through a support plan with the family.
Yolanda, thank you so generously for offering us your time, energy, and the work. Thank you very much to all the participants as well for your engagement today. Hope everyone is leaving this session with at least one action you can take to apply what you've learned here. As a reminder, we will email out the materials, including the presentation, which has those links available on it, to everyone who registered. So that should happen within the next week. And the final ask, we did drop the survey link into the chat. So please take care of yourself, take care of each other as you work to provide a safe place for children and a place of belonging. Thank you so much, everybody, for joining us today.